Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We have an excellent panel of experts here on the dais. And I will not introduce everyone. I would rather like this time to be... So this is a very important topic that we have just picked up. What should the transition to a zero carbon mobility look like? What should be the key elements of those transitions? What could be the pathways? What could be the potential timelines? In a very important aspect. We see this into three very large buckets of as far as transportation is concerned. First is the electric mobility and what we are seeing in India and elsewhere. What are the trends of change from two-wheelers, three-wheelers, from IC engine to electrifying it? And later on, as the grid becomes greener, you move towards a pathway of zero carbon mobility. The second is long distance freight, where we all know there are the current technologies do not possibly make EVs as the right choice, and there we are talking about alternate fuels, whether it is hydrogen, green hydrogen, or anything else. And the third, of course, is a shift from road to rail transport. So we have here a great set of speakers. And to my mind, there are 3-4 things which are extremely critical here. One is how does the government show the way Niti Aayog, Mr. Sinha, sitting here, have initiated the e-mobility work, and look where we have as a country come this far. So that one is the government. The second, we have Akshima from RMI, Pramit from ORF. What is the role of leading think tanks, international organizations, to have cross learnings between regions? How can India learn from something which already happened in the US, so we don't need to go through a learning curve? And the third is Priya represents the venture building part. Incredibly important to have startups and encourage them and take them forward. And Mr. Malhotra is the person who will guide us on this. How do we take the alternate fuels, including green hydrogen? But let me begin, Mr. Sinha, with you. What do you think is the role that the government needs to play when we talk about a roadmap pathway to a net zero mobility?
So this is one of the most amazing global disruption that has taken place. And internationally, if you see, globally, if you see, wherever this has happened, wherever the adoption, penetration of clean vehicles have been there, it has been kind of initially supported by the government. And vehicles are, as we know, very close to the heart. So that means simply that what you are attempting at is change of consumer behavior. In India, it is all the more so important because 334 million vehicles are there. And every year we are making 22 million vehicles. So that is what we are contributing. And we know that India's contribution to global greenhouse is close to 7%. Transport contributes within that 7%, 14%. And within transport, 85 to 90%, 80 to 90% would be roadways. In that roadways, another 40% would be close to that of the heavy duty vehicles. So if you go into the sequence, this is what the contribution to greenhouse gases have been. The good thing is that, in a very short span of time, let's say 3 years, 4 years kind of time, we have been able to pull off what has never been thought of. See, that is what the pace is there. So in absolute numbers, we are absolutely, top class. In percentage terms, we are not so good, I would say, in many of the vehicle segments. In some areas, yes, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, probably it's very good. Buses, again, it's very good. So the government's effort has been really, really outstanding. Since Prime Minister laid down the fundamentals in the MOVE Summit of mobility in 2018, and as a sequel to that, when the national mission was set up at Niti Aayog, and then, of course, everything followed. There was a FAME 2, and there was re-strategized FAME. There were PLI schemes. So all those schemes, and then we nudged the states. Nudging the states to get into the stream is all the more difficult. As I always say, It took Niti Aayog exactly 29 months. We were struggling with different states, you see. 36 of the states and union territories, we were kind of discussing with them to come out with one EV policy. One state to be on board with us with an EV policy. And after 29 months of consistent persuasion, Karnataka finally, they joined and they said that, okay, they notified their EV policy in September 2017. And with that, it began. In next 29 months, 9 states joined. In another 23 months, 19 states joined. And today, 33 out of 36 states are having, state EV policy. In addition to that, they have revamped the policy. So we have got Akshima, she has worked so closely with the states in, kind of crafting them, hand-holding them in developing the EV policy. Today, the states see these electric vehicles from a different perspective. They don't only see it only as a kind of, decarbonizing transport. They see it beyond that. They see it as an investment opportunity. And that is what precisely the lookout of these states are. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Sen. I think what I get from you is the leadership of the government, persuasion, working with expert bodies like RMI, ORF, and basically getting action at the state level. So let me bring in Akshima. Akshima, how important are these learnings between regions, between countries, and how can they help in fast-tracking this transition to a net zero mobility?
Thanks. Thanks, Saurabh. I think it's very critical, the learnings, but my only starting point would be that the learnings are not one way. They would be both ways, because the kind of innovation that is happening in Global South when it comes to electric mobility transition, when it comes to even the overall mobility transition, there are innovation, there are learnings that can be relevant for the entire world. But the point that you mentioned in terms of learnings and contextualizing opportunities and challenges of this transition, I just want to bring attention to 3 key trends. Mr. Sinha highlighted that this has been kind of unexpected. It's a significant disruptive transition that is happening. I just feel that we need to frame the opportunities and challenges of this transition from the context of what is really driving this transition. So to my mind, there are 3 key trends that are driving this transition. First is, of course, declining battery costs. The second one is the reducing EV cost parity. And the third is the policy push. Of course, all the 3 are interrelated. When we come to declining battery costs, we expect, yes, the wars have kind of disrupted those trends, but we do expect battery prices to go to the level in the coming years to anywhere between $60 to $90. There is a lot of innovation that is happening as the OEMs are transitioning to, from LFP to more advanced chemistry. So there's this huge opportunity. And, when you say learning part from the international perspective, I see a huge opportunity in terms of investing into, the capital investment and the talent deployment in this transition that will just come from batteries for e-mobility. We're talking about a scale of investment of close to 10,000 gigawatt hour of battery capacity just for transportation, if we go by the scenarios of electrification coming up by 2030. So 10,000 gigawatt hour from below 1,000 what it is now. It is a huge investment, capital deployment opportunity. It is a huge talent deployment opportunity. But at the same time, it comes with the huge challenge of the supply chains. How are we extracting resources to meet this battery demand? And more importantly, how are we ensuring circularity? Again, we have to look at rest of the world. We have to look inward in the Global South to just find the right learnings that people are deploying, innovations that are happening. We were told by CEO of one of the largest mining companies in the world that in 2023, every day, the amount of cobalt that we are using, it is actually equal to what the world used in whole of 2017, in just one day. I think let's not even get into other resources like lithium and others. We will have to, I mean, of course, this number speaks about the fast pace. Things are happening at a fast pace, which is what we need in terms of transition. But at the same time, it kind of raises the whole challenge and opportunity of ensuring that this is sustainable and just. And at the same time, we are building in circularity. And the circularity doesn't just come to my mind from reusing the lithium and cobalt. It also comes from the perspective of efficiency. How do you even size your batteries? When I'm looking at my US, counterparts in terms of policy making, how transition is happening, and looking at global South, we are just kind of transitioning big, huge trucks and cars there into electric cars. Is that an answer to decarbonization? That same car could have electrified 3 to 5 smaller cars and perhaps 20 plus electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers. So how do we optimize, before we even talk about circularity is a big question. The second key trend I talked about is the, driver which is really helping this transition is the EV cost parity. We are already seeing the TCO is working for many segments. We've seen that in India. Even without subsidies, commercial segments are already at total cost of ownership parity. The sticker price parity is also being achieved, of course, because of the declining, battery prices, because of economies of scale. And also a lot of OEMs are not shying away to take lower margins because they want to capture that early share in the market. And once that sticker price parity is achieved, we would just see explosion of innovation because of entry of new entrants who want to play with scale in this sector. So I think the second biggest opportunity is the manufacturing at scale opportunity, huge opportunity for countries like India, where they could be the global leaders when it comes to manufacturing of EVs. A lot of other, geographies would have that opportunity. But again, the challenge would be, how do you finance this transition? How do you invest? And something that we are missing is this huge skilling challenge that would come. How do you feed this amount of manufacturing? And last point quickly that I'll make is that this whole policy push has also been driving, whether it's the West, whether it's the global South, the transition definitely has been fueled by policy push, whether it is because of the international consideration and pressure, whether it is because of national priorities of energy security, pollution, climate change, or whether, what Mr. Sinha said, states are seeing it as an investment opportunity. There is also an opportunity in this policy sphere when it comes to the transition in terms of building capacity of policymakers and also creating feedback loops from them. We've never kind of drafted policy which talked about transition in mobility sector. So we have this huge opportunity to create those fast learning curves and feedback loops for the policymakers, but at the same time ensure that this policy is in the right direction. It is not inward-looking and protectionist as we are seeing throughout the world. It is not killing technologies, which are very nascent. It is technology agnostic. And it's not basically choosing winners of technologies and at the same time not giving wrong signals to the market or instability to the market in terms of like changing priorities. I think those are some of the learnings, what we see over the last decade in the West, last 4-5 years in the emerging economies. We need to be mindful of when we plan the next phase of transition when it comes to zero carbon mobility.
Thank you, Akshama. I mean, completely agree with the fact that disruption waiting to happen. Things are happening at a scale and a pace which is unprecedented. Your cobalt example is a, and of course, policies have been driving. Yes, we need skilling, we need investments. We'll pick up some of these topics as we go ahead. But Pramit, what if you were to prescribe a set of ideas or pathways that should be part of any net zero pathway to mobility, what would those top 3 things would be in your mind for any country, any region?
Thank you. So I'd just like to, before that, just build on what Akshama has said, which is that there is a fundamental difference in the way the electric vehicle transition is happening in the global South versus the global North. Which is that in the global North or in the West, we've seen that it's been driven by passenger vehicles transitioning or trucks, etc. Whereas in the global South, this is happening in the two-wheeler or three-wheeler segments. Not just in India, but this will happen across all countries in the global South. Now, this is a major opportunity for South-South cooperation in this case, right? Because there are two types of countries. One, who have a very large population of two-wheeler users, who can transition to electric mobility, but they don't necessarily have a manufacturing ecosystem there. And they're looking for reliable partners to provide those vehicles to them. The second is a country like India, which has a very active manufacturing ecosystem, which is already a long way forward in kind of transitioning to electric mobility. So how does a country like India become a partner to these countries, whether it's in Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, to be the major provider of two-wheelers and three-wheelers initially for these economies, right? And I think if that export opportunity is kind of taken advantage of, that will be a key driver for the transition as a whole, because then you're not just dependent on demand within your own country, but you have a much larger market that you can cater to. But in this case, the challenge is, one is on how does your localization policies evolve? Because there is sometimes a trade-off between the pace at which you can kind of scale up versus if you want to scale up completely dependent on a localized manufacturing ecosystem. So in that case, I think the first policy prescription is that for India and particularly some other countries which have electric vehicle manufacturing capabilities, is to really kind of push the R&D ecosystem to help develop technologies that are based in these countries, developed by companies within the country. And I think for that, there is a need for targeted government support, not just to build scale, but to build scale using technologies that are developed within those geographies. And of course, there's also the challenge of critical minerals. How do you actually get the raw materials you need to produce within the country? I think if the tech is developed within India, for example, the companies can also focus on materials and components that can be, provided from the manufacturing ecosystem within that country. So the tech question is important on both these counts. That's the first. The second is that the kind of reason why mobility is considered a kind of high emission sector, at least in the West, is that is the private vehicle dependent model of growth that has happened in the global North, right? Where the cities have been developed in a way where everybody owns a private vehicle. India and much of the global South, the mobility infrastructure is yet to be built. Our cities are yet to be built. And I think there's an opportunity to build cities in a way where build cities and also infrastructure, including railways, where you can actually shift to forms of mobility which are inherently more efficient. And that's not to say that sometimes the counter to this is that, are you saying people shouldn't buy cars? The question is not that people shouldn't buy cars, is that even if I buy a car, the most convenient way for me to travel should still be public transport. So I have a car, but my ideal way to travel is public transport. And same for freight movement, where if I am a business and I want to move my goods from one part of the country to the other, the cheapest and fastest way for me to do it should be railway, which means you develop intermodal infrastructure. We have the Gati Shakti mission in India, which is aiming to do exactly that. So I think there's a need to focus on beyond technology and how the way we plan our infrastructure and our cities going forward actually has that vision of what a zero carbon mobility future looks like.
Thank you. Important points. Planning in a manner that public transport, public freight is the first choice. Technology and how critical that is. And that really brings me to my the fourth panelist, Priya. Priya, we've heard all other panelists. What is the important role of innovations moving forward? I mean, in this space, as Akshima said, the amount of cobalt that we do on one single day is what we were doing 6 years ago for an entire year. And there are so many examples of it. If you look at India's two-wheeler space, for example, if you look at the EV segment of it, just 30% is from the traditional vehicle manufacturers. Almost 70% are people who have sprung up in the last 6, 7, 8 years. What needs to be done by, let's say, the governments, the industries, people like ORF, RMI, GAP, to support this ecosystem and also grow this ecosystem in exactly trying to solve problems that Pramit and even Akshima also outlined. So your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Saurabh, and thank you so much to ORF and GAP for having us. Just to introduce, we're an early stage venture firm. We invest in technologies powering the decarbonization transition. And we've actually, in partnership with ORF, launched a report yesterday, actually, Time to Venture, which profiles some of these companies. And so just to zoom in, I mean, some of the companies in that report also refer to low carbon mobility, for example, EV fast charging infrastructure, battery recycling, and various value chain elements to sort of low carbon transition. So I think, our view is that, there is so much sort of activity happening on the ground. We've got capital coming in to support these early stage companies. And I think we heard on a previous panel that there's a lot of early stage capital and, capital at the public infrastructure stage much later on, but sort of a lack of growth capital in between. And that's where I think there needs to be a lot more focus. There's, fantastic lab innovations that are being created, in universities, in research centers that perhaps take 6 or 7 years to actually see the light of day in terms of commercialization. And those need to be executed and those need to be sort of brought into the fore a lot faster so that industry can actually take advantage of these new innovations and start, integrating them into their everyday operations. And so, to some of the other points that were raised, the EV transition in India that we've seen, at least on the startup level, is really led by two-wheeler and three-wheeler transport. There's a huge push on commercial fleets, the mandate that mandates that 30% of commercial fleets, or rather that by 2030 there should be commercial fleets should be 30% electric. And that has really fueled a huge amount of innovation in kind of OEMs, startup OEMs, the likes of Ather Energy, but also in battery technology as well, going into these companies, and in infrastructure, so both in battery swapping and in fast charging infrastructure for vehicular transport. And what we've seen is that there needs to be a little bit more attention on the grid and how the grid will actually balance all of these EVs, basically pulling energy from the grid. One of our portfolio companies actually is looking at essentially providing support in terms of clean energy storage, battery storage to support parts of the grid that are essentially not resilient enough to basically withstand the huge number of EVs that will be pulling energy from the grid. So that company essentially has a battery, I would say, supply base and analytics and software that's created over the battery that grid companies pay for to get access to which points need support on the grid, which points are sort of off-peak and low voltage, et cetera. So those are innovations that I think need to be supported a lot more. I think what, in terms of regulatory support, would be great is sort of if there are grants available, if there is any kind of philanthropic support that can help get some of these R&D innovations out of the lab and mobilized. And then lastly, just wanted to mention on the circularity point of view, completely agree that 70% of the materials that are coming in for batteries are imported. We need to have more indigenous supply. And so we've actually invested in a company that's doing that. They have a recycling technology that is cost effective, low capex, much more low capex and sort of opex sort of free than companies that are using hydrometallurgy and pyrometallurgy. So this company essentially extracts lithium, cobalt, and nickel from EV waste batteries and electronic waste, and then puts them through a carbothermal process, which would then purify the metals and then resell them to battery manufacturers. And that in that way call themselves sort of an urban mining company. So we've got companies like that essentially are at the frontier of this tech, but need a lot more, I would say, in terms of visibility and capital support and growth trajectory to sort of take this forward.
Thank you, Priya. What I hear from you is that while there is a vibrant startup ecosystem, but a lot more needs to be done, both in terms of maybe a government support, funding support from maybe philanthropies from us, like us, and etc. So let me, at this stage, bring in Mr. Malhotra. And while we've all right now till now heard about electric mobility, but we all know when it comes to long-range transportation, perhaps the most optimistic candidate today is hydrogen, and particularly green hydrogen. India has actually one of the few countries which has come out with a green hydrogen mission with a very clear targets and goals and a capital behind it to support those goals. Do you think we are on the right track? Number two, what more can country like India do? And which is where you think the international community needs to come in and support these efforts that India has put together.
Thank you for the opportunity. Let me look the picture of this transition, whole era of transition which is happening from two sides. One is the local pollution and one is the global warming, which is the carbon dioxide emission. Local pollution is being taken care of by battery electric vehicles, certainly. But are we pushing the CO2 emissions from the vehicle side to the thermal power stations? If you continue to use coal-based power, I think you have to do the life cycle analysis. And we are also committed to net zero as a nation. And every industry also wants to go there. Hydrogen, on the other hand, also looks a very promising thing. Biofuels also look very promising from that point of view when you come into the CO2 emissions calculation. Hydrogen, if you produce it from renewable sources, and if you produce electricity for that matter from renewable sources, even then the battery vehicles also. So both of them will survive together. As far as two-wheelers, three-wheelers are concerned, I think in long run, the battery vehicles are going to be there, taxis. But when you ask me the question of heavy-duty vehicles, buses may be mix of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles or EVs. But trucks are supposed to carry the cargo load. They are not supposed to carry the battery load. And the range which they have to cover cannot be served by batteries. That's the view which most of the experts in the mobility sector in India have expressed. I was today morning in a session in the Emission Control Manufacturers Association conference, and where I moderated that session on hydrogen in IC engines. Hydrogen IC engines have been developed in India by various organizations like Ashok Leyland, Tata's. Bosch has provided the complete fuel system, the tanks, etc. There are some issues of high pressure storage being allowed by PASO and others. But I think the mobility for heavy duty transportation will, if we have to move in the long run, in the short run, all mix will happen. You know, in this interim period, even for city transportation or others also, we'll keep on seeing the mix. CNG will also be there, hybrids will also be there, EVs will also be there. But when you look at a longer picture, I think the and more of green electricity being produced, battery electric vehicles for two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and city taxis. Cars, total cost of ownership will have to be assessed. In fact, I was thinking of buying an electric car, but then I calculated how much I run, how much is the difference between the cost of an electric and how much I will have to spend for replacement of batteries. I was confused, and I looked, the total cost of ownership is still not favorable for electric, unless the new innovations happen in battery, which can certainly happen and reduce the cost. So having said that, the trucks, initially the hydrogen IC engines, but I think for a country like India, which is energy-starved country, I call, because we depend on imports for our oil, gas, even for batteries for that matter, will be dependent on lithium and cobalt will come from outside. Unless we have Kashmir, whatever we found is realistically, can be mined. We will have to look for more of green energy. And if we have to depend on battery for lithium and cobalt elsewhere, on China for batteries, for these materials, I think hydrogen is much more simpler way to go about. Use that green electricity to produce hydrogen, which can be stored. You don't have to, 24/7 problem also is solved because hydrogen becomes energy storage media. And you can use it in heavy duty engines. For the time being, IC engine technology is well developed. Long distance transportation can shift to hydrogen. In the long run, the fuel cells will play a very important role because the hydrogen fuel cells are twice as energy efficient as compared to the internal combustion engine. The energy efficiency of fuel cells and the capacity of hydrogen becoming an energy storage media. You don't need battery storage or any other storage media. You just convert your green electricity into hydrogen, it becomes a carrier of energy. And use that today in IC engines for heavy duty trucks. Tomorrow, you use that in fuel cells where the efficiencies will also play a big role. I think that's the road I look at in the longer scenario.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes left. What I propose to do is to maybe go around the room a minute each so that we can, again, have some questions from the audience. So let me come back to you, Mr. Sinha. And something that we have to talk about is the railways. And railways has set some very ambitious targets of net zero by 2030. How do you, what additional measures is the government taking or think or should do to push more road freight into railways?
So like railways constraint is only one. That is, the network is completely, saturated. So all the high density routes, 7 of them, which is 15% of the network, bearing 65% of the traffic, is completely saturated. Now what government should do? Straight answer, network expansion. What government is doing? Network expansion. So, will you believe what railways have been able to do in last 170 years? Our network is 70,000 kilometers. Now the direction is that in next 10 years, railways will have to lay down 40,000 kilometers. 70,000 in 170 years, 40,000 is the target for next 10 years, for which money has already been arranged for. So this is the kind of, movement that is taking place. My sense is railways are going to be absolutely important, and it will play a pivotal role in the modal shift. So that is probably putting the answer in a very precise form.
Thank you, and that's really inspirational, and that really brings me to Akshima. Akshima, we just heard Mr. Sinha talking about something which the railways did, which is not done in the last 170 years. What are 2-3 things that you, as RMI, propose to governments to the kind of disruption that you mentioned? They should be aware of doing well, so that they nudge this transport sector towards net zero in the foreseeable future.
I think one thing that I will say is I'll still stick to electrification. I think that is our low-hanging fruit. And one big thing that I would love to suggest to government is to focus on financing of the e-mobility transition. I think we've solved for many of the barriers. Policy has really spurred. Mr. Sinha talked about, the great work that the government, Niti Aayog, has done in terms of even taking the policy to the level of states and cities now. Industry is doing its bit. I think the place where we are lacking is financing. So how can we ensure that now financing, if you go back 20, 30 years, the fact that automobiles are now accessible is because ultimately it was really the role of financing, that how does financing come into play there? The second thing I would say in terms of the transition and to kind of, ensure that it is like, really being accelerated is to focus on skilling much in advance. I think this is one thing that we will face in the coming months and years, that skilling is a big challenge. So how can we engage with industry, with academia much early on to develop curriculums, which are not just about skilling, they are about upskilling, reskilling, and ensuring that there is an ecosystem throughout. I talked about talent deployment across batteries. You'll need all those engineers on the hardware side, software side, you'll need that workforce. So I think that would be my big recommendation. And the third will be we need to focus on heavy duty transportation in a big manner. I think they are just 2% in terms of stock, 2 to 3%, but they are 50% of our problem. So if we are talking about the transition towards zero carbon, about electrification, the whole equation changes in future because just the way economy is growing and the freight will grow. So how do we ensure that our freight transportation is moving towards zero carbon?
Thank you. Pramit, very quickly coming to you. We heard, I know we don't have much time, but supply chains and the international disruption and dependence that most countries have. What are the 2-3 things that you would bring out, would actually reduce this dependence for any region when you look at zero carbon mobility?
So I think I'll go back to my first point on technology. Right now, if you look at lithium-ion batteries will be for the near future the way to go. But it's not that these are the only technologies that exist. There are we're looking at sodium, you look at solid-state batteries. And there's a lot of research happening, and there's no reason why India can't be the pioneer in this. We have enough talent, enough research pool to actually be the first ones to take these to commercial scales in the mobility sector. The challenge is that a lot of these are happening in their own silos within universities or as research projects rather than as commercial projects. And I think some of the things that were highlighted allude to that, whether that's the role of venture capital in bringing these to the commercial stage, or it's the role of skilling and creating that pool of talent that can actually develop these technologies. But I see that as the kind of way, produce technologies based on raw materials and resources that you do have access to.
Thank you. Priya, coming to you, I was reading a report on the venture capital industry, and in the 15 sectors that they looked at where venture capitalists are going, climate was at number 10. Now, if you go down within climate, energy and new mobility may be actually much lower. What do you think needs to be done by maybe the governments, maybe by financial institutions to push this to not necessarily at the level of a fintech, but not too far away?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the issue with the perception of climate investing is seen as it's very asset heavy. And that is a, impediment to basically being able to get strong financial returns. And the reality is that, all climate innovations, whether it's adaptation, mitigation, etc., we need to invest in physical products and actual assets that are going to decarbonize. It's not purely a software play, and it's not purely something that you can sort of invest in and be out in, say, 5 to 7 years or traditional venture horizons. This is going to be a longer gestation. There'll be sort of R&D, there'll be pre-revenue companies, and it will take significant amounts of capital to actually get to a particular type of scale. And maybe we'll see different exit horizons as well, and different types of exit paths. So what I would say is to basically encourage more investors to come into the space, is get more comfortable with this longer time horizon and get comfortable with the different industry players who are out there who are willing to come in as strategic investors to also help grow the support and sort of increase the marketability of these companies to eventually an M&A or some kind of acquisition from these larger companies. And then in terms of government support, as we've alluded to as well, would be great to see more grant funding going into these research labs, universities, to get these companies that are more as research projects, to get them to commercial scale. That would be my thoughts on that.
Thank you. And very quickly coming to you, Mr. Malhotra. I'm not an expert on hydrogen, so please pardon me if my perception is wrong. I've heard from some places where I overheard conversations that while industry is ready to provide green hydrogen, there's not enough demand today of green hydrogen. Do you agree with this perspective? And if so, what can be done to drive demand for green hydrogen a bit more than what we are currently seeing?
Actually, what is happening is that people are putting up the electrolyzer units to produce the green hydrogen, as you rightly said, and there is no demand. The Bureau of Energy Efficiency has been given a task by the Ministry of Power to develop a plan for mandating certain use of green hydrogen in refineries, also certain percentage. But since the green hydrogen cost is little higher, refineries obviously are resisting a bit. But public sector refineries will embrace it, and they will go for it as per the plan, 5% of their total hydrogen. Because refineries are the largest consumers and producers of hydrogen. We have been doing in refineries for decades, using hydrogen and producing hydrogen. But we produce it from natural gas. So natural gas-based hydrogen is cheaper as compared to green hydrogen today. That cost differential will either have to be passed on to the customers in terms of the fuel price hike, which will be a few paisa when compared to the total cost of fuel. Otherwise, the refineries possibly may be asked to absorb also. I don't know. I don't want to comment on that. The second is they are trying to push the fertilizer units also to use green hydrogen. The issue in fertilizer unit is there is a lot of resistance from fertilizer industry because already the government is subsidizing. And last meeting, which was taken by Cabinet Secretary on Green Hydrogen Mission, where I am an expert member in that policy-making body, it was mentioned that and the Cabinet Secretary also said this fertilizer we need to, weigh a little cautiously because government is already providing subsidy. If you push costly hydrogen over there, the cost will go up. But that's what's BE thinking, that we will push these sectors. But steel sector, cement sector, where decarbonization is a must, and that can happen only through hydrogen. The border tax being imposed by European Union. I think these are the factors, and the carbon credit policy, compulsory carbon, you have to, and most of the companies voluntarily also saying that they want to become net zero. I think these are the things where hydrogen will play a very important role, and demand is likely to be created in a big way. In fact, I was calculating and told the figure that our present hydrogen consumption is 7 million tons per year. And we have a target of producing 5 million tons of only green hydrogen. Our total demand in 2030 it will be 14. So we'll still have a 9 million ton gap, which will have to be gray or blue. Gray is normal from natural gas. And if you capture that carbon and convert that CCU technologies and use that carbon into use, either putting underground to increase the oil exploration in our oil fields or convert into chemicals, I think that's the solution that we can meet that demand. But green hydrogen will certainly have a great demand. Even green ammonia export also is being thought of, where the Minister of Power recently said that they are ready to give all kind of green credits and carbon credits and pass it on to the people who buy that green ammonia from India. So I think there is likely to be.
Thank you, Mr. Malhotra. We have a couple of minutes. I will take two questions. Maybe from the gentleman sitting on the round table, and then I think I'll go here. Yeah, please.
Thank you, panelists. It was a great enlightening session. I am Dheeraj Jain from Hitachi Energy, and I head government institution relations. My question is to Malhotra sir. It's very we have seen solar power tariffs going from 14 rupees per unit to now sub 3. So what is your anticipation on the green hydrogen tariff also? Is it going to have a same sort of a trajectory? Second question, sir, to you is that...
let's take the second question later, because they are... one last question, and then I'll ask my panelists to respond, because we are actually out of time and we still have 2-3 panels left.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Rahul Banerjee. And my question is to Mr. Malhotra. Good to see you. If you remember, we met around 4 years ago when you were with 50. My question is about the green hydrogen transition on a domain that I was actually looking for. There is a mining sector. Now, it is we work with the Swedish, and it is a very tested formula that electrification of mining sector is not going to work, especially in India. Where are we with the technology when it comes to hydrogen? Thank you.
I didn't get that question clearly. First question from the gentleman from Hitachi.
Yeah.
I can answer that. The electricity prices, you're right, green electricity cost, solar power came down to 2 rupees from 17 rupees. And that is a major factor. But still with cost of 2 rupees of electricity and the present state of capex and opex, which is required for electrolyzer operation and buying the electrolyzers, the cost is coming to about, is fairly high, about $6 to $7 a kg of green hydrogen. Now, we don't anticipate any reduction in cost of electricity further. It may come down a bit, but the probability of producing green hydrogen from biomass is also another opportunity in India. There is a lot of biomass which is being burned, and you see all the pollution around is based on biomass burning. If that can be converted to hydrogen, experts tell me on biomass gasification, we can produce hydrogen at par with the natural gas-based hydrogen even today, and that would be green. As far as electrolyzer costs are concerned, government has already come out, MNRE has come out with tenders where they are inviting people to bid for the electrolyzer incentive scheme and also on green hydrogen production. There was a study which I went through, KPMG study, that the inter-transmission charges and etc. have been waived. You are aware about it. And if there is a further subsidy of 50 to 60 rupees, which government has promised on green hydrogen, I think looks like, and the carbon credits, which will also be available on the top of it. So the differential is likely to come down. So then that will become very attractive and people will embrace it. As he said, there is no takers. I think there would be many takers for the green fuel because hydrogen can be It will be an enabler for decarbonization in any industry. Steel, cement, these are hard to abate sectors. And if we have to go to net zero, I think hydrogen is the route to go about. Not necessarily for mobility, where battery electric vehicles will also be competing with that in long term, but other industries will use.
Thank you, Mr. Malhotra. I think you answered both the questions. You answered both the questions in this. So let me not, let me stop here and let me hand it back to Mannat or Gopalika. Thank you very much. Let me thank all my panelists. A big round of applause for their excellent inputs. Thank you.